Welcome to Incredible Indies. Today's program will center on new documentaries. Throughout the show, we'll test your indie IQ, and our roundtable guests are here to share their stories of the risks and rewards of making provocative nonfiction films. The list of praiseworthy documentaries in 2012 included The Invisible War, Searching for Sugar Man, and The Queen of Versailles. In 2013, filmmakers addressed a variety of topics, from the economy to the war on terror and tragedies close to home.
County Sheriff's Office.
We need SO to respond for a dead person at SeaWorld. A whale has eaten one of the trainers.
SeaWorld trainer Don Branshaw was killed by a 12,000-pound whale in 2010. That horrific tragedy is retold in Blackfish, an expose of the cruel treatment of whales in captivity and their exploitation by greedy marine park owners.
Who is actually looking out for the American worker? The answer is nobody.
A vanishing middle class and rising income inequality pose a threat to our American way of life. That, according to top economist and former Labor Secretary Robert Reich. His documentary, Inequality for All, connects the dots from the Great Depression to the 2008 financial crisis and the present.
We are losing equal opportunity in America.
There's a power to these women that stand on stage with these guys.
It's a bit of a walk. That walk to the front is complicated.
20 Feet from Stardom moves the spotlight from pop and rock stars to their unsung backup singers. The film examines how race and gender discrimination prevented extraordinarily talented women from attaining fame and fortune in the 60s, 70s, and 80s.
Anything that's been digitized is not private. And that is terrifying.
Forget about holding on to your money. Protecting your personal information is the frustrating challenge in a digital age.
No one has read the terms and conditions. No one in the world.
Terms and conditions may apply confirms that Big Brother not only is watching you, he is reading your email and tweets. With the cooperation of Google, AOL, and other companies who know too much about their unsuspecting customers.
There are hundreds of covert operations on multiple continents with the full support of the White House.
In the controversial documentary Dirty Wars, investigative journalist Jeremy Scahill attempts to uncover the truth behind some of the top-secret missions of the Joint Special Operations Command in Afghanistan and the death of innocent civilians. The elite fighting force assassinated Osama bin Laden in 2011.
America knows war. They are war masters.
The language being used by these guys was like, oh my God, what are they gonna do?
Female CIA analysts were on bin Laden's trail well before 9/11. Members of the Sisterhood, as the women were called, warned of an attack, but the male-dominated agency did not act on their intel. Manhunt is the true story of events that were partly fictionalized in Zero Dark 30.
It is said Shinohara is the most famous of the poor and struggling artists in New York.
The makers of Cutie and the Boxer capture on film a unique love story between struggling Brooklyn artists Oshio and Noriko Shinohara. Married to him for 40 years, she set aside her ambitions to support her husband's career. The title refers to his series of boxing paintings and Cutie's autobiographical drawings.
My name is Julian Assange. I'm the editor of WikiLeaks.
We Steal Secrets portrays WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange as a paranoid, hypocritical self-promoter who refused to answer the media's questions about an alleged sexual assault. The documentary's more interesting character is Chelsea Manning, formerly Bradley Manning, the soldier-turned-whistleblower who leaked Iraq and Afghan war documents.
It's not about WikiLeaks, it's about transparency. Who gets to control
personal information.
Stop and take a deep breath. They're going to cut the last tree in our lifetime.
In Musicwood, 3 famous guitar makers band together to save Alaska's Sitka spruce. Wood from these majestic old trees give acoustic guitars their unique tone.
In this age of technology, where you can manipulate anything, how do we retain that human element?
Sound City is a valentine not only to that famous San Fernando Valley recording studio, but also to analog music. Dave Grohl of Nirvana and Foo Fighters fame directed the documentary, which features a who's who of rock and roll luminaries. Sound City closed in 2011. Time to test your indie IQ. Here's your first question. Name the popular 2005 documentary narrated by Morgan Freeman. The answer, March of the Penguins. Who directed Al Gore's Oscar-winning An Inconvenient Truth? The answer, Davis Guggenheim. The documentary Inside Job exposed the causes of what 2008 crisis? The answer, the near collapse of the nation's economy. 2 Chicago high school basketball players were the stars of this 1994 documentary. The answer, Hoop Dreams. Those who make documentaries are by nature persistent and usually on a noble mission. And that description certainly fits our guests here at the Roundtable. And it is my pleasure to introduce Barbara Rick, an Emmy and Peabody Award-winning director and president of Out of the Blue Films. Joel Heath, a leading ecologist and director and producer of People of a Feather. Kathleen Treat, executive producer of After the Fall, HIV Grows Up. And Andrew Muscato, producer of Schooled, The Price of College Sports. And all 4 of you have made documentaries that gave those without power, those without money, those without influence, the opportunity to tell their stories. And Barbara, I'm specifically thinking of one of your early films, In Good Conscience. I think we're going back to 2004.
Yes, it had its U.S. premiere at Lincoln Center in 2004.
And in that film, your cameras followed a Roman Catholic nun who was silenced, as I recall, by the church because she ministered to gay and lesbian communities. What was the effect of that film then, and what's the effect of that film today?
It's so exciting to have been part of something that was bubbling under the surface and to have taken a story and followed it.
Since I was about that high, as they say, knee-high to a grasshopper, I thought that God was calling me to religious life. So after high school, I entered the School Sisters of Notre Dame, and I taught school and was a good little nun for many, many years until I met a gay man, and that friendship really changed the direction of my life. The question that Dominic kept asking me, he said, "Sister, now sister, what is the Catholic Church doing for my gay brothers and sisters?"
Sister Janine is doing amazing work still and is now at the forefront of efforts, to legalize same-sex marriage across the country. And, and we always say, she's one of the few women in the world to take on the Vatican and win, because Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, who became Pope Benedict XVI, stepped down. Historic, unprecedented developments in the world. I'm not saying she caused him to step down, but she's still there doing her great work, and he's no longer there. I mean, it's really, the world has changed, and it's been wonderful to be part of a film that just zoomed in on this one, little voice standing up to the hierarchy and the patriarchy of the Vatican and refusing to be silenced. I mean, she just had a compelling story, and she continues to this day.
Your film, People of a Feather, is set on the Belcher Islands on the Hudson Bay. Why is the Inuit population there at risk?
Yeah, I mean, the popular story that you've probably heard is about climate change, but Inuit and Hudson Bay actually think that hydroelectric projects have been having a bigger impact on sea ice ecosystems there. And part of the problem there is that electricity demands peak in the winter, and so the rivers now flow in the winter instead of the spring, and all that water from the reservoirs gets dumped onto the ice, and so it affects how it freezes, how it breaks up, the habitat for the animals, the safety for hunters, traveling out to get food to bring back to their communities. And one of the problems is that salinity is different. It's fresher water that gets dumped, and fresh water freezes a lot quicker and at warmer temperatures than salt water. So if you get a cold snap and everyone's using a lot of electric heat in Quebec and New York, for example, then the water is dumped onto the ice and it freezes really quickly and traps animals.
Spending time with the Inuit people, did you come away with the impression that they feel completely powerless here? They're up against major corporations and also nature.
Yeah, I mean, they've been working on this for a long time, like over 20 years. Like you might remember back with the Great Whale Project that was shut down here in New York.
Yes.
And that was kind of the early part when they were speaking their concerns. And I mean, back then a lot of the concerns from the Cree about the land that was flooded was addressed, but the Inuit concerns about the downstream effects on the ocean still haven't been addressed since that time. And there's been a bunch of new projects come in, and there's this new proposal for the Champlain Hudson Power Express to bring new hydroelectric imports to New York. And so the timing is really critical now to try and actually do something about this. And there is an obligation there from industry to do something, but they haven't done it yet.
Kathleen, your film, which was, I needed 10 handkerchiefs to get through that film, very powerful. You gave the teenagers who survived a pediatric HIV epidemic in Romania a chance to tell their stories.
One of the markers of a developed country is a low infant mortality rate, and so they tried to keep them alive to become a developed country. And so it was crazy practices of injections of vitamins and plasma and blood, and then...
And they were kept in appalling
terrible
circumstances.
Circumstances.
Were dirty and
yeah, and they would just use the same needle right on down the line. And then when AIDS entered the country in the mid to late 80s, that infected blood made its way through. The country said, we don't have that problem here. And so none of it was screened, and 50% of the children in the institutions contracted HIV.
In Romania, there were over 12,000 children infected with HIV/AIDS due to the unsafe medical system.
They didn't accept the idea that HIV was something that existed.
But your film is a hopeful one.
Yes.
Because you follow those who
yes.
made it.
Yes, you know, there are so many heroes in this story, so many caregivers that were there that had no idea what was happening when it started. And then when communism fell and Ceausescu was overthrown, then the information started coming in and they learned the proper care, and they stayed with these kids. They had so many opportunities to leave and they didn't. They stayed there and they loved these kids and they fed them good food and they held them and they took care of them. And then the ARV drugs came and all of this came together and these kids lived, and now they're telling their stories, and it's amazing.
It is, and they are to be congratulated for having this good story to tell and then wanting to tell it, because they lived in a, certainly a repressive regime where you did not talk, you didn't speak, certainly not against the government.
There's still that fear that it could always go back to that, and they never know when. So there's a lot of kids in silhouette because of that fear.
Andrew, your film is an expose, a very dramatic one, of how college athletes are exploited. Now, frankly, it came as a great surprise to me, because and I think I'm not alone, I'm under the impression that most of these college stars go on to very lucrative careers in the NBA and the NFL. How are they exploited?
Right, well, I think that's the thing, is most people think, oh, these guys get a free ride, they're well taken care of, they don't have to go to class, and it's very hard to find sympathy for college athletes. But the reality is, only 1% of those athletes are going to play professionally, and yet the NCAA...
I'm sorry, only one?
Oh yeah, it's very rare that, I mean, if you think about the thousands of kids participating in college sports, but college football and basketball in particular, which are the big money makers, it's a really tough road to get to the professionals. And so the the problem is most guys are only thinking about going pro, and the question is, well, where does the education come into all this? Because that's what they're being offered. They're saying, you're coming to our university, and we're not going to pay you, but we're going to pay you by way of a free education or an academic or athletic scholarship. But the question is, well, what strings are attached to that scholarship, and do these guys even get that free education? I mean, in some cases, maybe they get a degree, yes, but is that really a worthwhile education?
Now, the NCAA is the villain in your movie, and I think I'm right, it's college sports, a $12 billion
Yeah, I mean, college
business.
sports have really taken off. I mean, if you think about the TV contracts, the merchandising, all the apparel, I mean, it's definitely big business. And the NCAA, I think they're well-intentioned people, and they're the ones in charge of writing the rule book and putting together the Final Four and all that stuff. But the problem is the rules have kind of gotten out of hand, and you see people getting punished for NCAA violations, which really aren't, you know, crimes in any state or in the USA, and also the punishments that the NCAA hands out are pretty arbitrary.
And I think you also make a case that you feel they should be paid.
That's part of it, but I think it's more.
The athletes, I mean?
Yeah, I think the athletes, that's kind of the sexy topic that people like to talk about, is athletes, college athletes getting paid. The reality is they already are getting paid by way of stipends.
In kind.
But I think the bigger issue here, and that's why our film is an adaptation of a Taylor Branch article from the Atlantic Monthly, it's about rights. It's the fact that these athletes, this whole group, whether you're playing field hockey or basketball, these athletes don't share the same rights that any other student on a college or university have.
And many of them are African American.
Right. When you're talking about the revenue-generating sports, and that's kind of an uncomfortable subject for a lot of people, that you have the revenue sports, football and basketball, which are mainly lower-income inner-city kids subsidizing the middle-class sports like lacrosse and field hockey, and that's another issue that people don't like to talk about.
Over time, have you found that you get emotionally attached to your subjects? I mean, you spend a lot of time with them. So I wonder how it's not that you want to be objective, because these are subjective pieces, but do you get emotionally involved?
Oh, absolutely. And a good example of that is the recent documentaries we did with Deborah Santana, Girls of Daraja and School of My Dreams, which follow these high school girls in Kenya who are changing the world. They're just amazing young women. And my husband, who's the cinematographer on the project, and myself, we just happened to sponsor one of the girls. We helped her get through school. There's ways to contribute to the Daraja Academy that we just did as, individuals on our own, just because we were so moved by what Jenny and Jason Doherty are doing with this school. And we're very invested in her success. She's right now taking these critical KCSE exams, which are like the big exams that are going to,
You sound like a nervous parent.
Talk about the future. She's our Daraja daughter, I have to say. We just love her. And now we have a new student, Winifred, that we're supporting. And anybody can do this, and it's just a really thrilling thing. And I just also wanted to say, last night we showed the film at the Smithsonian. We were invited to the Smithsonian. Deborah Santana was there, LaTanya Richardson-Jackson, who narrated the film, and we showed it at the National Museum of African Art at the Smithsonian, which was like a highlight of my life. And to see these girls just shining, wherever we take the film, everybody just falls in love with them and are invested in their success.
And Joel, you spent a lot of time with the Inuit population, so I would imagine that you've become quite attached to them.
Yeah, and it's actually a long-term project. So in addition to the film, we're following up with an action campaign. We've started a registered charity and are continuing to do work there. And one of the amazing things is a lot of the kids that were involved in the film, like there's a hip-hop video in there with the kids out in the streets. And a lot of those kids saw the film, they learned about the research that we've been doing that's with the community, and they want to be involved in some of the community-based research as well. So it's been really exciting to have kids that were dropouts from high school come up and say, we want to be involved in research. It's been really amazing. So I'm there for the long haul.
You're there for the long haul. Kathy, how did the filmmakers win the confidence of the young people who appeared on camera, their experience is so horrific. How did you convince them that they could trust you to tell their story?
Well, I have been supporting a project with these kids since about 1997, and so that's the only way that we got to go film them. And it's through the work that we had been doing all of that time, and then I worked with World Vision and the trust that they have with the World Vision staff there in Romania. And we spent a lot of time going over exactly who would let their face be seen or their voice be heard, or who wouldn't, and maybe they contributed their own stories that influenced, and then there were only 3 that would show their faces and let us follow them. But it was very difficult, and I felt extremely responsible for each one of them, that their identities were concealed and that they felt safe with what we were saying and what we were doing.
As for them, it must have been a great concern that somebody would inadvertently give out their name, and in that situation could be very damaging for them.
For their families
and their
as
families,
well.
Yes.
Many families have 4 children, and one of them is HIV positive because they were born in those few years when the blood was contaminated. And their siblings might not be able to get jobs or go to college if they know that they have a sister or a brother with HIV.
Andrew, how did you win the trust of the athletes in your film?
That was the biggest challenge, I'd say, and going into it, I didn't expect that. I thought that athletes, especially, I knew it would be tough to get current college athletes to speak to us, but I thought guys who were out of the system would have no problem speaking to us. And one of our partners on the film, Dominique Foxworth, is the president of the NFL Players Union. So here's a guy who definitely knows plenty of men who played college football, and even through him, it was very difficult. The guys out of football either are afraid of upsetting their former coaches, don't want to burn bridges, they don't want to appear ungrateful. I mean,
they have a lot riding on this,
right?
Yes. On not cooperating with.
And then even the guys who didn't make it to the pros are embarrassed over injuries that they have. A lot of guys who suffer some sort of partial paralysis. Guys who made it through college who didn't really know how to read or write. There were a few of those that we spoke to, but those, as you can imagine, people like that would be embarrassed to speak to us on camera. And with current college athletes, I think it helped that me and my partners in the film were in our mid-20s, so we weren't that far removed from being in college ourselves. So, I think we were able to relate to those guys more. But yeah, it was just a constant, knocking on doors and just finding guys. Fortunately enough, there were a handful of athletes at UCLA. They were seniors. They 2 of them in particular, Jonathan Franklin and Jeff Locke, ended up getting drafted. They're in the NFL now. So we were able to drop in with them throughout their senior year. They were kind of aware of this billion-dollar machine that they were a part of, and were very kind of vocal in the fact that athletes should be more participatory in this system. So they were able to kind of speak to us, knowing that by the time the film came out, they would already be in the pros.
Joel, is this a good time to be a documentary maker as opposed to, and I'm thinking more now about the technology and the ways in which you can distribute your films now that did not exist even just a few years ago?
Yeah, I think the technology thing was huge. I mean, we were using digital SLR, and even before that, the prosumer cameras that came out. And what was a big strength for me for the film was when I went up there, I didn't go up to make a film in the first place. I was up there doing a PhD. I was filming birds diving underneath the ice that led to Frozen Planet, and we were like, maybe we can really make something to tell this story, and the story kind of unfolded. And it was through being very non-invasive and not having a big film crew there and using the kind of less invasive modern technology that really gave it that intimate feel, and the fact that I'd had a camera there since the first day I was there and made friends, and then we decided to make the film together. And on the distribution side, yeah, I mean, I think it's tough and it's hard to get into theaters. There's a lot less independent cinemas in Canada, especially.
Or here too.
Yeah, but I think producers now have the capacity to make a film that is really visually compelling, can compete with the big pictures on the big screen. So definitely have to adapt a little bit. Like we didn't, when we did our theatrical release in Canada, we didn't just do it at a whole bunch of cinemas all at once. We went to different cities across the country and released it there. And kind of we're on the ground building that momentum there.
And there's a lot of new technologies coming up, and you know, and just partnering with people. Ted Hope is the one who always talks about collaboration and cooperation and that kind of thing. And you know, we help each other as storytellers, and really trying to support the community and just continue to put one foot in front of the other and get these projects out there. But it is daunting. It is daunting.
What advice would you give young people who want to go out, make documentaries, shine a light on those subjects that need to be investigated?
If you have a story and you have a digital camera, do it. I mean, you know, what everyone's been saying is absolutely right. I think now with digital technology and the internet, you know, if you have access to a camera and a good story, you know, I think people now, because of YouTube, are even more accepting of, you know, crummy production values, even if it means good stories. So, and that's kind of exciting, is I think filmmaking has become a lot more democratic in that way.
And giving, yes, go ahead, Bob.
No, I was just going to add that the great film strategist Bob Hawke, who's sort of a legend in independent documentary, always says, you know, every film has a life. So if you make that film will be seen. Every film just has a life, and it's, you know, if you feel that urge to make that movie, make it.
Would we all agree that this is a good time to be a documentarian? Yes?
Mm-hmm.
We have an almost unanimous vote here. Yes, I'm getting yes. We thank you all so much, Barbara, Jill, Kathy, and Andrew. Thank you for being with us, and we look for the next chapter in all your lives. Thank you. We'll be right back. Time to test your indie IQ. What is the title of Michael Moore's 1999 film about a high school massacre in Colorado? The answer, Bowling for Columbine. Who is the presidential candidate in 1993's The War Room? The answer, Bill Clinton. Where did documentary maker Morgan Spurlock eat for a month for his film Super Size Me? The answer, McDonald's. Name the former Secretary of Defense in the fog of war. The answer, Robert McNamara. It is the title of an online dating documentary and an MTV series. The answer, Catfish. That's our show. Please visit us online at cuny.tv. I'm Pat Collins for Incredible Indies.